Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. And I'll start things off by wishing everyone a Happy New Year. Hope that you had a fun New Year's Eve and a fun New Year, and wish you all the best for 2024. Also wanted to thank everyone for the kind comments following our 200th episode in this Buffalo Wings series that we posted yesterday. Hard to believe how much time we've sunk into OOTP this year. And as we prepare for the 2042 All Star game, where our Buffalo Wings will have three representatives, the starting pitcher, Alexis Barajas, our closer, Joe Scott, and the outfielder, Luis Comaduran. Our Buffalo Wings are in a pretty good spot. We've got a 6.5 game lead on the New York Mets in the National League East, and we've got a 2 game lead on the Cleveland Guardians for the best record in baseball as we try to defend our 2041 World Series title and try to make the playoffs for a 15th consecutive season with this team. Couple things that have come up in the comments to the last couple of episodes that I wanted to get at right at the start. We mentioned at the end of our last episode, when we did our annual review of how our players are performing midway through the season, that Deshaun Seifu, with 35 stolen bases here on July 14th, still has an outside chance at passing Bobby Bethea and Mike Karras to lead the National League in steals for a record-extending 15th consecutive season. And Not My Four-Ply brought up his hopes that Deshaun would be able to do that. And I noted in the comments to Not My Four-Ply that I actually cranked Seifu's stolen bases up one notch from where it was to the max as far as his settings. Figured we've got a 6.5 game lead in the division. Seifu's had an incredible career with us, and he's still a very proficient base runner. 35 out of 45, so around 78% success rate this year, is below what he's done over the course of his career. But with 70 speed and 75 base stealing proficiency, he's still a very effective guy on the base paths. So we're going to open things up a bit over the last 2.5 months of the season and see if maybe Seifu can once again lead the National League in stolen bases. Another thing that I talked about in the comments was the somewhat disappointing season that we've gotten out of Josh Porter this year. Given that we're playing him every day rather than last season where he played primarily against left-handed pitching. Porter has basically been a league average offensive player, hitting just .236. And when we go into the stats and his splits, we see that very harshly this season. Against left-handed pitching, he's putting up a ridiculous 161 WRC plus. While versus right-handed pitching, the WRC plus is just 86 this year. And certainly when we look at his ratings, I would expect him to be somewhat more proficient against left-handed pitching. So Fake Name brought up the thought, given that he's struggling and that the young outfielder Tylen Hotaling, who's a left-handed hitter with pretty respectable ratings against right-handed pitching, except for the fact that he's never going to draw a walk, has been hitting pretty well this year in a very small sample size. Why don't we give him an opportunity? And this is another move that I've made largely because we've got such a big lead in the division, and I don't feel like we can try some different things. So I did do what Fake Name suggested, and I've got Tylen Hotaling in as our right fielder against right-handed pitching. Porter still in against left-handed pitching. The other thing this let me do was move up last year's reigning Rookie of the Year, Ishmael Velasco, from the 6 hole in the lineup to the number 2 hole in the lineup against right-handed pitching, which will get him a few more at-bats over the course of the season. Not sure if when we get to the playoffs, whether either of these guys will be in the lineup against right-handed pitching. As I noted, we still do have Bobby Bolig, former star of ours, who we signed as a minor league free agent right when the season started, to a contract with major league options that he opted out of after 30 days, and then we re-signed him to a true minor league contract after that. So we've got him stashed in AAA, where he's, not surprisingly, hitting very well, putting up a 132 WRC plus. Bolig is still a pretty proficient hitter against right-handed pitching as well. My thought is we'll probably put him onto the 40-man roster before the end of August and likely bring him up in September. And it is very conceivable to me that when all is said and done and we're putting a postseason roster together, that Bobby Bolig could actually end up in our starting lineup against right-handed pitching as a corner outfielder or a designated hitter, given his relatively proficient left-handed bat. And the last kind of note to our mid-season review that I wanted to comment on was something that Jarek Braxton and Jack Hammer Possessor were talking about. Mentioned that our middle infield was an area that I thought I'd like to try to improve, if at all possible. And they kind of agreed in the comments that Alejandro Contreras, who we picked up in a big trade a couple years ago, kind of is what he is at this point. Doesn't look like he's really getting any better. Hitting 236 this year, 97 WRC plus. He has drawn some walks and he has a little bit of pop with 15 doubles and 5 homers and 182 at-bats. So he's not an entirely useless offensive player, but he's also not a dynamic offensive player by any stretch of the imagination. They suggested maybe we should have traded him a while back when we potentially could have maybe gotten more for him, particularly with the fact that we've now picked up a potential replacement for him with Ferguson in the first round of this past draft. Kind of wondering what the long-term thoughts are on Alejandro Contreras. And I admit his long-term future, and quite honestly, the long-term future of him, Mike Whitehead, and Jim Andrews are all up in the air. I like using 2 of 3 of them at second base and shortstop, and having the third of the 3 of them as a potential backup utility guy that we can use in a pinch. So I don't hate our middle infield right now, but I did note that at the end of the last episode that if there was a big-time middle infielder out there that we could bring on board via trade, would certainly look to improve that area. Unfortunately, there's not really anything out there that's realistic that would be a game changer. And just to put things in perspective, I did a search of just second basemen who are competent in contact, power, and eye, so not necessarily great hitters, but competent hitters with above average defense. And there's only 5 of those guys in the majors, and we've got 2 of them in Andrews and Contreras. One of them is our former longtime shortstop, Steve Anderson. Another one is Pat Tresek, who's out for the next 4 months with post-concussion syndrome. So the only one that's a realistic trade target is probably Muhammad Amjad Kaufman, shortstop for the Padres, who's a pretty solid hitter with a 131 WRC plus this year, 75 infield range. But when I try to trade for Kaufman, have to include an Andrews or a Contreras, which is fine. But we also have to include Jim Lance, the best young pitcher in our organization, who's in the majors, as well as another top-line starting pitcher, an Alexis Mendoza or a Alexis Barajas, and giving up a middle infielder who admittedly is not as good as Kaufman, but is a lot less expensive, plus two frontline starting pitchers to me seems like a price that is far too high to pay. I tend to think most of you will probably agree with me on that. If you don't, it's always interesting to hear those comments as well. But I think when I actually did this search here, it just put into context that the type of players that I'm hoping to look for in the middle infield who are good defensively and not really going to hurt me too much offensively, I kind of have those guys who are available with Andrus and Contreras. It surprised me there wasn't a bigger opportunity set out there. But based on that little piece of information, it does make me think that we're probably not going to be incredibly active as the trade deadline approaches. I thought about reuniting with Shamar Jeanneret, but he's 37 years old. He's fragile. His WRC plus this year is down to 107. He's a below average defensive outfielder, and even his batting ratings at this point aren't exceptional. Could bring him on board to just play against left-handers, but for the money he's making and what it would take to pick him up in the trade and his limitations on defense, everybody gets old, and it seems like Jeanneret may be at that point. And you look at what he does against right-handed pitching, and I think I'd rather just promote his old teammate Bobby Bolig from AAA. So I don't see us chasing after Jeanneret. The catchers that are available didn't really interest me, particularly with the fact that we've got Ramirez lurking in AAA, and he could be in the mix to be on our postseason roster rather than Miller when all is said and done. So I don't think there's a real obvious path to a middle infielder with a bat or an upgrade at catcher that I was talking about in the last episode. Pitching-wise, I think there are some options out there if we wanted to upgrade our pitching staff, which I talked about the back end of the bullpen being something that maybe we'd want to focus on a little bit. But as I think about this more and more, we've got 13 pitchers now. We typically only take 12 into the postseason and on the postseason roster. So we're going to be getting rid of one of these guys anyways. And when I kind of look at the traits of these pitchers, we've got a pretty talented bullpen. And we've also got 2 or 3 guys in AAA who are going to be fighting to join this team in September, who I'd feel very comfortable plugging in the event we did have some injuries over the next couple of months, and who, in a perfect scenario, could end up fighting for that 11th or 12th spot on the postseason pitching roster. So I don't know that I'm going to do much pitching-wise either. The other thing is that the only players that we have with options to send to the minors are Jim Lance, who is arguably the most talented starting pitcher we have on our team at the age of 24, even though he's having a little bit of a down year statistically compared to last season. I don't see us sending him down. And then the only other guy with options is Robbie Farrell, the 29-year-old with 3 option years left, who, again, has pretty attractive traits for a pitcher, and in limited usage has a 3.54 ERA, a 1.33 WHIP. Is the last guy or one of the last guys out of the bullpen. I don't feel bad pitching a guy like Farrell. So if there's an awesome deal out there over the next few weeks, I'll continue to investigate and think about doing it. But it is conceivable to me here on July 14th that if we don't have any injuries, we just stand completely pat as we go to the trade deadline this year, which is not normally the way I roll. I usually like to add a player or two when I think the team is competing for a title, which we certainly are this year. But I don't know if there's any obvious ways to really upgrade the team without completely mortgaging our future. And we've simmed ahead another week coming out of the All-Star break. We took 3 out of 4 at home against the Pirates. You can see we're now up 8.5 on the Marlins in the division. We've won 2/3 of our games this year. 3 up on the Guardians now for the best record in baseball. Actually, that's not true anymore. We're 2.5 up on the Dodgers now for the best record in baseball. 3 up on the Guardians for the best record in baseball. So I guess technically it is true. We are up 3 on the Guardians for the best record in baseball, but the Dodgers are closer to us than the Guardians at this point. And in those 4 games, giving Deshaun Seifu even more of a green light than he's typically had seems to have paid off. He stole 6 stolen bases in those first 4 games out of the All-Star break. He is now tied for the league lead, and importantly, he was 6 for 6 on the base path. So with the little push that we've given to Deshaun to maybe try to lead the league in steals one final time, he seems to be taking advantage of that so far in the very little sample size that we have. Also, just a programming note here, meant to mention this at the top of the episode, but have had some time off over the last week from work to enjoy with family, which has been very nice, and also spend a little more time doing videos. So I've put out a lot of videos over the past week and a half, and just going forward, it's Monday, New Year's Day morning as I'm doing this video, and the pace of videos will probably fall off a little bit going forward when it's back to work for me, back to school for many of my family members in the coming days. And in perhaps the least surprising news as we approach the trade deadline, our fragile catcher, Mitch Houlihan, going to be out for 4 days with back spasms after he was throwing his dog a frisbee. Fortunately, it's not that serious of an injury. As I've mentioned in previous episodes, we've been trying to nurse Houlihan to health this year by using him less. Walt Miller is our full-time starter against left-handed pitching, and even against right-handed pitching, we're playing Miller every 3rd day over Houlihan to try to ensure that Houlihan stays healthy. But unfortunately, he's having a few problems after tossing the frisbee around with his dog. Looks like Jim Andrews also banged up with a relatively minor injury right now, a bruised thumb. So I don't think there's anything we need to chase right now as far as making trades to account for those injuries. Do have a little over $3 million at this point to take on some contracts if we have to. So we'll see how things go over the coming days, but it could be a quiet trade deadline for the Wings this year. And as we sit here on the Monday before the trade deadline, it's July 28th today, have 7-game lead over the Marlins, 8.5 over the Mets in the division. And at 66 and 34, we're 3.5 games better than both the Dodgers and the Guardians for the best record in baseball. Seifu, with 44 steals, has quickly passed Bethea and Karras to be leading the league, but still a good battle shaping up there with those 3 players separated by just 2 stolen bases at this point. Barajas tied for 2nd in the National League in earned run average. So it's getting to the time where we're going to have to decide what to do. Interestingly, we did get an offer for Darnell Polite, who's probably the top pitcher on the trade block, someone we've looked at. Interestingly, we'd have to send the left-handed hitting outfielder Tylan Hotaling to Toronto as the centerpiece of that transaction. Batting average has dipped a bit to 263 with him playing more regularly and just a 82 WRC plus. So the everyday action doesn't seem incredibly well suited for Hotaling. As I mentioned, we do have Bobby Bolig in AAA. So I guess there's an argument to be made. Hotaling is not as good as Bolig right now. and we are a win now team that's going to look very different next year. Why don't we ship Hoteling away now, bring in Bolig to make our team a little better potentially offensively, and then also get a really good arm to supplement our bullpen in Darnell Polite. And there's definitely a lot of reasons to like that trade. I think I just kind of laid them out for you. The concern I have is that I don't know exactly who we move on from in the pitching staff. I think we probably send Robbie Farrell down. It doesn't look like he's actually pitched over the last week and a half in that long relief role with a starting rotation that's very healthy, and with the exception of Eau Claire, generally gives us 5, 6, 7 innings a start. There's not necessarily a lot of use for those 6th, 7th, and 8th guys out of the bullpen. So I think there is an argument to be made that maybe Farrell just takes one for the team and goes down to the minors for a month before coming back in September, since he does have those options. And that assumes that he won't refuse the assignment and make things even more complicated on us. So I'm intrigued by that trade because it is a win now year for us. I've touched upon this in previous episodes, but this team is going to look very different next season, at least in the context of we've had a lot of consistency in our roster and particularly our pitching staff from year to year over the last 10 or 15 years of this playthrough. But we're in a situation financially where there's going to be some pretty significant turnover next year. Alexis Mendoza, longtime starting pitcher, free agent. Juan Romero, all he's done is lead the team in homers and ribbies each of the last 3 seasons, free agent. Our starting catcher, Mitch Houlihan, and our backup catcher, Walt Miller, also free agents. Long time at this point stopper, Nate Ruckel, headed to free agency. And those are the most significant ones. We're also going to have team options on a few players, Sean Drawn, David Rivera, most notably Deshaun Seifu. And then we're going to have some guys getting to arbitration numbers that may get a little dicey for us. Think we bring the closer back. David Espinoza is a left-handed bullpen arm, though. $6 million is getting pricey. If we somehow find a spot in the rotation for him, say with Mendoza going on, maybe we justify that. Eric Barbarito, a little over $8 million, is a 4th starter. Probably keep him around. Josh Porter, with the way he's hitting, though, I like his profile, but at $6.5 million, that's a question. Floyd Auclair probably comes back at $5.5 million. Really like what he's done so far. And then some relievers in Pat Cheek and Robbie Farrell getting off of the minimum salaries into making more in arbitration. Certainly need to at least think about their futures with the team. So there are a lot of decisions that we're going to be making this offseason. As I said, the amount of turnover on the roster will be likely higher than we've typically had most seasons. So given that we're the defending champs and given that we are a win-now team, I am inclined to try to do everything possible to get this team across the finish line first this season, since it's the last rodeo for a lot of these guys with the Buffalo Wings. And largely for the reasons that I just outlined in that soliloquy that I went on, I think I'm going to do this trade with the Blue Jays. And unfortunately, it's one of those weird OOTP trades that kind of have to do exactly as is. I don't really love the first baseman, Sergio Tristan, that they offered us in the deal. He's not anywhere close to a major league quality player, and he's also got some negative personality traits. But if I take Tristan out of the deal, they won't do it. And I can't even get them to retain a little extra bit of Polite's contract. when I try to modify things, they don't want Hoteling in return. They want a better player in return. Hoteling, finally made the team out of spring training this year, largely because of his left-handed bat. He's got, as we've talked about, a decent hitting profile against right-handed pitching, with the exception that he's just never going to draw a walk. His defense is pretty average. He is durable, but he's almost 27 years old, and he has, at this point, 111 major league at-bats over parts of 3 seasons. He's just not a big part of our future. And Bobby Bolig is a better hitter against right-handed pitching right now. Now, there's certainly risks in Bolig. He's fragile and he's older. Going to be another guy that we're trying to just keep healthy for the playoffs. But given that Bolig's hit pretty well in AAA this year, I think Bolig over Hoteling helps us this year. And certainly adding Polite into our bullpen, who's the best player available on the trade block, at least among relief pitchers. Another guy who's fragile that we're going to need to be careful with, but another guy who could end up pitching some significant innings for us in the playoffs this year. So we are going to actually go ahead and complete that trade. Fans very excited to have Polite on board. A little disappointed that Hoteling is gone. Now we need to hopefully figure out that Robbie Farrell will take his demotion to AAA like a man, and he does. So that gives us the roster spot to put Polite on the Major League roster. Actually, we just put him on the secondary roster, but we're also going to be putting him on the active Major League roster. And we are going to promote Mr. Bolig to the active roster as well. And given that it hasn't been a vintage season for Nate Ruckel as our stopper, I thought about maybe trying Polite in that role, but at least initially we're going to move him into a setup man role, push Pat Cheek back to be a middle reliever, and push Chris Powers back to be a long reliever. Feel like now we've got even more depth in our bullpen than we did before, and as I mentioned with Bolig, headed to the Major League roster, think we're going to have a little more offense as well. And with the trade for Polite made, Toronto had kind of pushed us to the limits of our money available, and obviously with the promotion of Bolig, not much, if any, financial flexibility left. Clearly, we could, lower scouting and development for the last couple months of the season if we needed to, but that's probably not the route we're going to go. So Bolig is going to plug right in as our number 5 hitter and our designated hitter. The result of this is that our defense weakens a little bit in the outfield against right-handed pitching. We've now got Coma Duran in right field, where he's not incredibly proficient, but hopefully he'll learn how to play the position defensively over the next couple of months. And we've got Juan Romero moving from DH to left field, where, again, he is a very average defensive player. And Coma Duran was in left before, and now he's moving to right. But Coma Duran is durable, and Romero is an Iron Man. Bolig is also another guy who's basically an adequate Major League corner outfielder. But he's 35 years old, and he's fragile physically. So we are going to use him in the DH role and only against right-handed pitching as we try to hopefully keep Mr. Bolig healthy. So we'll have that bat available for the playoffs. And we did also just update our strategy settings on Bolig. If his fatigue gets below 95%, we're just going to put him on the bench. Again, it's late July. We've got a 7-game lead in the division. I think we've just made the team better with Bolig taking over for Mr. Hoteling, and by proxy taking over for Mr. Porter in the lineup against right-handed pitching, and adding Polite into our bullpen. Feel like we've made marginal improvements in 2 areas. The goal is just to keep both of those veteran players healthy for the next 2+ months so they can hopefully help deliver us to another title. And we've made it past the trade deadline now. For some reason, since we didn't do anything else, don't really know exactly why, but our total money available had turned slightly negative, so we cut our player development budget down by $1 million for the remainder of the season. Feel like we're in a pretty good spot. Not the most exciting trade deadline, but a 7-game lead over the Marlins, 7.5 on the Mets as the calendar turns to August. At 65-37, the surging Guardians, who have won 5 in a row, are only a game and a half behind us for the best record in baseball. We are still 3.5 up on the Dodgers for the best record in the National League. So the hope is that we can keep this team healthy over the next 2 months of the season. Right now, everyone on the major league level is looking good. Have some pretty significant injuries to big-time minor league prospects still occurring, which we talked about in our previous episode. Luis Palencia, out with that ruptured UCL, is one guy who's not going to be able to help us. But when we look at our roster in Albany, part of the reason I didn't do too much at the trade deadline this year is that I feel that there are definite potential reinforcements there. You may remember Frode Broders, who we picked up this past offseason in a trade with Pittsburgh when we traded away Jorge Berrios, catcher, who I know some of you liked a lot. But Frode Broders hitting .269, 22 homers, 57 ribbies in AAA. Still think he can get a little bit better as far as his contact and his home run power, which could turn him from a usable major league player to a good major league bat. So still has some development that hopefully will take place. But he's a guy with some potential. Willard Vokey, another guy who we picked up in a trade right before the season started. That was the deal when we dumped Damani Hainsworth to get that salary off the books when Hainsworth was a borderline roster guy for us after we made the trade for Eau Claire. Vokey hitting .270 with a ridiculous 37 homers and 96 ribbies for AAA Albany. Similar to our friend Broders, guy who looks like he can hit the ball out of the park. Don't know how much else he's going to really bring to the table, but there is some value in power hitters, and Vokey's a right-handed hitter. Broders is a lefty, so got a couple of options for DH, first base, corner, outfield going forward with those guys. Mike Frank is another guy that we traded for this past offseason. View him as a utility infielder, but wanted to ensure that he got everyday playing time. And you can see at this point he's now basically, we think, completely developed with his bat, putting up a 107 WRC plus in Albany. So I think it's likely he'll be a slightly below average offensive player at the major league level. But he can hit the occasional home run and draw a few walks. We've had him playing second base in the minors this year after he played first base the first few months of the season, just trying to make him as versatile as possible defensively with that 35 turn double play rating and 50 range and error. He's certainly not an optimal second baseman, but just want him to be as versatile as possible. And if we need to play him even at a position like second base for a couple of days here and there down the road, want him as competent as possible when doing that. Edgar Canales, first baseman / outfielder, part of the reason we were okay with the trade of Hotaling is that Canales is a similar-ish player. We're trying to get him trained at first base. Honestly, defensively with his range, he's a little better, and I think arguably he's going to have a better bat against right-handed pitching than Hotaling when all is said and done. Similar to Hotaling, I don't know if he's a huge part of our future. He's fragile physically. Does have a little bit of speed, and is a left-handed hitter. Probably will be in the mix for either a call-up in September or maybe to make this different-looking 26-man roster next spring. The last guy is the guy that you're probably most interested in hearing about, Juan Ramirez, the young catcher. We promoted him a couple weeks ago from Utica to Albany. You can see we think he's close to fully developed at this point, just turned 24 years old on trade deadline day yesterday. The contact is at an acceptable level. You may remember when we picked him up as a free agent, showed his 35 out of 45. So the good coaching that he's gotten and probably some luck has helped him get up to competent contact with potentially slightly above average home run power, a really good eye, durability, and excellent catcher defense. Certainly view him, with the fact that Houlihan and Miller are both free agents after this year, as our catcher of the future. It's also very conceivable, given Miller's offensive deficiencies, that when we get to September 1st, Ramirez will be coming up and really kind of taking over as our primary backup catcher for Miller. And as I mentioned, it's likely that next year he will be our starting catcher on opening day. Put up a 115 WRC plus, largely by virtue of the 14 homers he hit in AA. That number's improved to 127 in 41 AAA at-bats, 2 doubles, 2 homers, and a 268 average. If he can be a competent bat who draws some walks with that catcher defense, really excited to get Ramirez onto our team next year. Last but not least, we've got a ton of pitchers. We did make the trade for Polite. He is at a different level than these guys that we're going to talk about right now, so I felt it made sense for a win-now team. But I didn't go crazy otherwise, because we've got a lot of guys who can help us if we've got some injuries in the back of the bullpen. Mike Roberts, 7th rounder we picked out of Coastal Carolina a few years ago. He has been in AAA for about 2 years at this point, parts of 3 seasons. He's been excellent every year, really just caught in a numbers game. Still has 3 option years left, but nothing really left for Roberts to prove in AAA. So I think it's conceivable that with the fact that a couple of those bullpen arms are going to move on from making minimum salaries next year to a couple $1 million a year, Mr. Roberts could be in the mix to be in our bullpen next year. Ben Borgian, veteran left-hander, and Austin Britz, a guy who's come up through our system after being a free agent or a scouting discovery, both in the mix as well. Robbie Farrell, we talked about. We demoted him to make room for Polite. Still have Inahiro Miyake, who was with us a few years ago as a left-handed arm and has been stashed in AAA and comfortable with that for many years. Nelson Davila, last year's Rule 5 acquisition, spent the entire year with us last year, had him down in AA Utica and now in AAA Albany to get a little more seasoning this year. But we've got his rights now, and he does have option years left, so likely to be organizational depth for us the next couple years, and a guy who could help at the major league level. And then, most importantly, we've still got 2 more starting pitchers coming. That 6 or 7 year span where I think we took a starting pitcher in the first round of the draft for almost every one of those 6 or 7 years is starting to pay some dividends at the major league level. And it wasn't just first round pitchers that we were taking those years. It was also second, third, fourth round pitchers and international amateur free agents as well. But Chris Lott, number 95 prospect in baseball, starting to look like he's going to be more of a back of the rotation type of starter. But he's 12-5 with a 4.61 ERA this year at AAA Albany. 23-year-old, could certainly get a call up in September. And then Simeon Minielli, international free agent signing from 2037. He is a guy that we just took a flyer on, signed him for $750,000. He certainly wasn't the top guy we went after this year, but really like his profile, really liked his personality. He's durable, throws in the mid to high 90s, and he is 12-2 with a 2.73 ERA this year at AAA Albany. So another guy who we think could help us in the majors in the not-so-distant future. Not optimal stamina and pretty atrocious in terms of his ability to hold runners, but with the likelihood that we'll be moving on from Mr. Mendoza this offseason, and the fact that Palencia is likely to miss most or all of next year, would think that Lott and Minelli are both in the mix to certainly be September call-ups and or pitchers on the 26-man roster next spring. So kind of a interlude there with a review of some of our AAA players and the depth that we do have in the organization that may be needed to help us over the next couple of months if we have some injuries, and likely will be needed to help us next year after this team in transition likely loses several important players this offseason. And with that, we're going to call it an episode. Next time around, we will finish up the regular season. Knock on wood, hope this team can remain healthy and be healthy and strong when the playoffs begin. The goal right now is certainly to maintain our lead in the NL East, maintain the best record in the National League, and hopefully maintain the best record in baseball. And also wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if Deshaun Seifu ends up winning a 15th consecutive stolen base crown, which it seems like us taking the reins off of him a bit has resulted in him moving right back to the top of that list. You can see Alexis Barajas leading the National League in ERA at this point. He'll probably be getting some Cy Young Award votes again this year. So it's been a good year for the Buffalo Wings. Now we've just got to see if we can keep our older guys and our fragile guys healthy for these last couple months of the season. Houlihan, Bolig, and the newly added Polite, as well as Alexis Mendoza, are probably the four guys who have historically had some injury issues that we are going to be most anxious to ensure that we don't push them too hard in terms of playing time and try to keep them healthy and well for the playoffs. And we'll see how successful we are in doing that in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching and hope you have a great day.